Welcome to the Macmillan Report. I'm Marilyn Wilkes, your host, and today our guest is Professor Dean Karlan, a professor of economics at Yale and president and founder of Innovations for Poverty Action, or IPA. Professor Karlan's research interests include poverty issues in developing countries, and in particular, financial innovations and microfinance programs aimed at the poor. He uses field experiments to learn what social policies work, what do not, and why. Professor Karlan also does research on fundraising, voting, education, and behavioral economics. Welcome, Professor Karlan.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So let's begin with talking about Innovations for Poverty Action. What is it, and how did you come to found it?
Sure. So Innovations for Poverty Action is a nonprofit organization whose mission is basically to first learn what types of ideas out there in the world are effective in addressing poverty problems and social problems more generally. Some of that work involves creating new ideas that are then simultaneously tested in the field to see what is their effectiveness. Some of those are really about taking ideas that are out there or they're well established, but that we don't have clear evidence on whether they work or not. And a big part of the mission for Innovations for Poverty Action is about doing the hard work beyond the initial idea to really establish whether something is a good idea that can work in many contexts and many locations, rather than just having a few case studies that say, aha, this worked once here. And so it really pushes hard to really understand how we can make the research and translate that research into scale-up programs that will affect many, many more people, not just the individuals that participate in a pilot program.
Okay. So what actually caused you to found it? Was it something in your research that you were doing? What was the impetus?
So the impetus is, it's more the other way around, actually. So the easier way of explaining that is explaining why I'm a researcher in the first place. So 16 years ago, I was an intern for a microfinance organization in El Salvador. And my work there had nothing to do with research, but what struck me the most was how little we really knew about not just what the impact was of this program, but why this program was working the way it was working. Why was it making group loans? Why was it making loans of the size it was making? Why was it making loans of the interest rates that it was charging? And what was it that we were expecting the clients to actually do with these funds in terms of what types of training programs did they have access to teach them how to run microenterprises? And there was a lot of these types of questions were not being explored, and there was really no evidence that this organization could look to help guide it in making decisions about how to run its program.
Okay.
And so that's the reason I went back to graduate school, was to do research on this. And then basically in graduate school, what I discovered was, academics really hadn't been doing this type of research either. And so this is why I started doing this type of research. But then, if all I did was the research, it wouldn't really satisfy the reason why I was doing the research in the first place, which was getting that information back into the hands of the practitioners, of the policymakers, so they really knew what they could do with that. What is the evidence that's out there, and how can they use that to make better decisions? And so a large part of IPA's mission is about the communication, the dissemination, and the scaling up of successful ideas, the stopping of bad ideas.
So let's talk a little bit about the primary objectives of IPA.
So the primary objectives, in some respect, can be put into two piles. There's the production of knowledge, that includes creating ideas and testing them, and then there's the scale up, the communication side of IPA's mission. We're young, so all of the work so far that we can really talk about very concretely is really more about the production of the knowledge. We're starting now to have some success stories to be able to do the scale-up type work that we were, kind of created in mind to do, but it's not then the lion's share of the work that the organization has done so far. We're now building our capacity to enter into those types of projects.
Okay, can you talk a little bit about some of the success stories?
Sure. So one that I find very exciting is really one of the most first order questions that you could ask in the world of credit for the poor, which is simply, what is the impact? Now, a lot of microcredit is focused very heavily on micro-entrepreneurial, but there's a growing movement within financial services to say, well, why should we only be lending to micro-entrepreneurs? Maybe consumer loans can have beneficial outcomes as well. And there's a lot of tension in this policy debate, because if you look to the United States, for instance, the same lenders making these same types of loans are often given a lot of bad publicity because the interest rates are high, and people ask questions about whether these are productive loans helping to generate income or simply kind of trapping people into debt traps. So we looked in South Africa, which has a very different market than a lot of other parts of the world in terms of the credit markets for the poor. And we worked with an organization, it was a for-profit firm that was lending to employed individuals. And these were fairly high interest rate loans at 200% APR a year. So if we were going to find bad effects, this is probably a good place to look. And in fact, what we found was that the access to credit led individuals to be more likely to keep their jobs. And what's key here and what's different about what IPA does and what I do in my own research as a Yale professor is that, whereas prior studies would do things like compare people who borrow to not borrow and see their changes in their life, here we set up a randomized trial. And this is really, at the heart of my academic research as a professor, and also the research that others through IPA are involved in. And so we worked with this lender to set up this randomized trial where some were randomly given credit and others were randomly not, of people who applied for loans. And so it had very positive effects. This is not to say that I think the arguments have now been resolved by any means, and in fact we need to see replication of this type of project so that we can know under what context can we take these results to the bank, no pun intended, and really believe that even at these high interest rates, that allowing people to borrow and encouraging this type of borrowing can lead to beneficial outcomes.
Okay, moving to another area of your research, behavioral economics. You developed an online program called STICK. Tell us a little bit about it and some of its success stories as well.
Sure. So I think an easy way to talk about STICK is, first I'll give you kind of an explanation in the big picture of what the theory is behind STICK, and then tell you about some research we've done in the Philippines that serves as kind of the backbone of the evidence that we have about it.
Okay.
So the basic idea is grounded in the concept that there are a lot of things in our life that we say we want to do, but that when it comes time to doing it, we find for some reason we don't do it. This can be as simple as overeating, as not exercising, smoking. This can be even on other things, not saving enough. This could be about not cleaning out your closet. This can be about voting. You say you're going to vote, but the election day comes and something comes up and you're busy and you decide not to vote. And so the basic idea is that there are vices out there in the world that we actually might prefer for our vices to be more expensive. So we would like dessert at a fancy restaurant to cost $100 so that I can go to a fancy restaurant, order a healthy meal, and not be tempted by dessert because it's going to cost me $100 and I'm not going to spend $100 on cake, right? And so there are people that would probably prefer restaurants that have pricing structures of that nature, or that when you walk in, you could say the maitre d', which menu would you like? And you'd say, give me the one that has $100 prices for desserts, please, and $20 for everything else. And there people might actually prefer that. And so the idea behind STICK is a way of institutionalizing and facilitating that type of pricing scheme for people. If you want to make your vices more expensive, you can't actually do that in a restaurant. You cannot go to 7-Eleven and ask them to simply make the candies more expensive. You can't go to the gym and just ask them to drop the price or pay you to work out. But you can set up contracts that basically create that exact incentive scheme for yourself. And so in the Philippines, for instance, we did this with a rural bank where we took, the rural bank offered clients the opportunity to open a savings account. And they put money into that savings account that they were spending on cigarettes. So the idea is they're taking this money that they were going to spend on cigarettes and instead it goes into a savings account. And they agree that in 6 months, after 6 months of depositing money in the savings account, they take a urine test. If they fail that urine test, well then they lose that money. And that money gets sent off to a local orphanage. So it still does good in that sense. But if they pass, then they get their money back. Now what's beautiful about this from a policy perspective, it's a win-win. We actually mobilized savings at the same time that we got people to stop smoking. And it was wildly successful. The increase in likelihood that people stop smoking was 30 percentage points, which is unparalleled to other smoking cessation interventions. And the other project we did in the Philippines was on savings. So we did this one 5 years ago. And in this setting, all we did was something very simple. We just gave people access to a savings account in which they couldn't access their money until they reached a goal. And the idea there was, would people actually prefer to not have access to their funds? Would they prefer the illiquidity? And they didn't get compensated for this. It wasn't like a certificate of deposit where you get a higher interest rate. It was just the same account you had before, but now, if you go to the bank and ask to withdraw your money, they tell you no. Right? So do people want to restrict their future choices? And the answer was yes. 28% of the people that were offered this opened their account, and their savings tripled as a result of doing it. It was also had a nice, powerful effect on gender. As a development economist, one of the things we often look at is how men versus women react differently to different interventions that are out there, and what that can tell us about the household dynamics. And what we found there was that women who had little decision-making power within the household, after they were given access to this account, had more power over purchase of durables in the household. So then back to STIC, in a lot of respects, the website is simply a manifestation of this basic idea. Obviously, it's a little bit more general. In the website, how the website works, very simply, you go to the website, you say what your goal is, you say how much money you want to put towards that goal. You say who has the power to declare you a failure. So you usually hear, this has to be someone you trust. You don't have to have a referee. A lot of people do choose to do their contracts on their honor. But the trick with the referee is you really have to trust them not just to report honestly about you if you succeed, but the trick really is finding a referee who's willing to actually report you as a failure. Right? And then you say where the money goes if you fail. And that money can go to the referee. A lot of people do that. Other people choose charity. And one of the more favorite options is to choose what we call the anti-charity. So the way the anti-charity works is you're given a list of 10 politically polarizing charities. So the George Bush Library and the Bill Clinton Library. And then we took 4 kind of hot social issues, and we took 2 charities that work on both sides, work on either side. And so your idea is you're supposed to choose what you hate the most, and that's where your money goes if you fail.
And have you used STIC yourself?
So STIC very much is a manifestation of my personal life in this respect. So actually starting in graduate school, I wrote a contract with a fellow graduate student and to lose weight, and we lost 40 pounds, and we both lost the weight. And then we both had a maintenance contract that went on for many years. And so I am very much a user of this concept in my own life as well.
Okay. And the address is at www.stick?
Stick with an extra K.
.com?
So STICKK.com.
Okay. All right. I'll have to check that out myself. I have a couple issues I can work on too.
Great.
Thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate learning more about your research.
Great. Thank you.
For more information about Professor Karlan and his impressive body of research, please visit our website at yale.edu/Macmillan Report. Be sure to join us again next week for another episode of the Macmillan Report, made possible through funding from the Whitney and Betty Macmillan Center for International and Area Studies. Thanks very much.
Thank you.